So tonight our program is on reptiles and amphibians, and Dr. Jenkins will be speaking to us. He is a conservation biologist and wildlife conservationist, works with the Oriental Society down in northern Georgia with a focus on reptiles and amphibians. And so I will turn it over to you, and you can tell us more about yourself.
Thank you, Susan. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about really amazing groups of animals that most people kind of love to hate. They're the slimy, dangerous, icky animals of the world. But they're really important. And I have a saying, I have a podcast, and at the end of the podcast I always say snakes are animals too. And snakes are animals too, and they're just as important as so many of the other animals that we care about in this world. So I moved here, well, let me back up. So I, as an undergraduate, which would now be in the, probably in the mid-90s, I first came to this region, and I spent a summer at the Highlands Biological Station taking classes, working with graduate students. And then about 15 years ago, I moved here, and I moved here from out west in the Rocky Mountains, living in an incredibly wild place, just kind of on the outskirts of Yellowstone National Park, with this incredible full suite of predators, and just a place I really loved. But when I was moving to the southeast, all I knew is I could move anywhere. I was either going to move to Alabama, Georgia, or Florida. And I ended up remembering back to those days in the 90s that there were mountains in the south. And so I ended up picking Georgia and getting as close to where I had been in Highlands at the time. So that's how I ended up here. And in ways, it kind of shaped my view of this landscape and how I've worked on conservation over the years here. And, you know, I chose this landscape. Yeah, that would be great. I was just actually going to ask you that. Is that too dark? Is everybody good?
That's good.
Nobody's falling asleep on me now. And I chose this beautiful landscape in some ways because it reminded me of the West. Just these expansive views that go on forever. Public land, wilderness areas, wild and scenic rivers. And then on top of that, just really incredible diversity. Animals that, we interact with, such as turkeys and white-tailed deer that people enjoy hunting. Animals like bears, they're just incredible icons to the region. And then those groups of animals that I'm here to talk about today, moving to the area that is the biological hotspot for salamander diversity in the world. And I knew that coming in because that's why I was at Highlands. I was working on salamanders all that summer. So I moved, and I just had this mindset, I'm moving to the most wild place I can if I'm going to move back east. But I started to learn quickly as I started studying these animals and working on their conservation that this is really a changed landscape, and that's an important perspective for me to have as a conservation biologist as I think about what these animals need to persist in the landscape. And so here, many of you have seen that photo and certainly know that distribution and the story of the American chestnut that was such an important tree for that region. And I won't go through all the details, but as you all know, that tree, while they still exist, they're kind of functionally extinct in a lot of ways. And for a lot of the animals that I work with, they're definitely functionally extinct in that they don't produce, they don't grow old enough to produce those nuts, which ultimately feed and kind of fuel the food chain for things such as rattlesnakes and other species that we work on. So I started learning about that. I was reading books. I became involved with some of the chestnut organizations. And then I've always been big into landscapes and natural disturbances and the history of those and how they change over time, again, so I ultimately can do a better job conserving contemporary species. And I've learned that our natural disturbance regimes in these southern Appalachian landscapes have changed significantly. And I'm certainly not representing them all here, but beaver populations have declined incredibly. And then, for a whole variety of reasons, but that's where a lot of us live. We live where the beaver used to live. And you have to imagine these prehistoric landscapes with extensive beaver wetlands probably through a lot of these valleys. A lot of the large ungulates, things such as bison and elk, that may have shaped some of those landscapes and some of the vegetation processes, hydrology and other things, those are gone. Fire is not as prevalent on the landscape as it once was, and with the exception of 2016, most of our fire now is put on the ground in a prescribed manner, and we're not burning as much as would have been done prehistorically. So, and then the other one I have there is ice damage and cold. As climates continue to warm and we get less and less ice and snow, we're getting less of those damage to forests. So my point being that a lot of the natural disturbance regimes used to shape the landscape that these snakes and salamanders and all of these things used to live on, they've all changed significantly over time. And so that frames how I think about conservation biology and got me kind of where I am today. And I look at these landscapes, and I still love it here. I'm so glad I live here. I've lived here for 15 years. I'm going to live here forever. I'm going to die here. But now I look at them slightly different. I don't look at them through that same lens as I did 15 years ago when I moved here. I look at beautiful places like this, where a lot of your lowlands are rural, developed kind of oftentimes in an agricultural way, sometimes in more of a residential development type of way. And these beautiful mountains with all this public land, but these forests are actually much, much different as well. So again, I'm just kind of painting that backdrop of the picture, if you will, because that's how I think about conservation. And so now as I'm moving through my career, I think about how do we conserve rattlesnakes? How do we conserve hellbenders, other species? All of these things factor into how I develop conservation programs. So with that as that backdrop, I want to introduce you to the organization I founded about 15, 16 years ago now. And then I'll talk a little bit about our focused work here in the Appalachian Highlands. And then I just want to do something that's really fun in that everybody loves, well, I don't know if you love, everybody has strong emotions about rattlesnakes. And I have some live snakes here, and we're going to take them out, and I'm going to give you the opportunity. I've worked as much on the rattlesnake species we have here as anybody in the world. And I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask. We're just going to have a discussion about venomous snakes. It can be anything from any question you've ever had about their biology to talking about conservation and programs we implement. So we'll just have a big venomous snake talk and an opportunity to get some real hands-on, at least eyes-on experience. So let me introduce you to the organization that I founded. It's called the Orianne Society. And we're named the Orianne Society. Orianne is the name of a person. It's kind of like Audubon is the name of a person. But when I say the word Audubon, you think of birds, right? You think of bird conservation. From here on out, when you hear the word Orianne, I want you to think about reptiles and amphibians and conservation. So there's really nothing else in the world except Phil Collins' wife that has that name. And it's about his ex-wife. But, so the organization is called Orianne Society. We were founded, well, I'll tell the story briefly. I used to work for the Bronx Zoo, and I was based in Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and I was doing conservation work for a whole variety of species, a lot of snakes and amphibians and reptiles and sage grouse and elk and pronghorn and just a whole diversity of species. Had a whole program there in Yellowstone. And this young girl named Orianne, her father happened to be a philanthropist. He created the largest nonprofit for the conservation of great cats, like tigers and lions and things like that. And his daughter had the opportunity to go. It was actually in Florida. She went to a zoo in Florida, got a little backstage tour, as billionaire children will get, and she had the chance to hold this indigo snake, eastern indigo snake, and she asked her dad if he would do for indigo snakes what he's doing for tigers. And so the Oriental Society, our nonprofit, is essentially a gift to his daughter, and it's created in her name as a legacy to her kind of vision for saving snakes. And I just think it's great, because like one young child, as compared to billions of people in the world, created what is the largest, we're tiny by the way, but the largest snake conservation organization in the world. And so anyways, that's how we got our name. And at the top you see our mission. It says we work to conserve imperiled reptiles and amphibians using science, applied conservation, and education. And smarter people than me, like Tracy there in the back in our communications program, developed this slogan you see here at the bottom, which is how we describe it to people: science-fueled, boots-on-the-ground conservation. So we do science-based conservation. A lot of nonprofits do that. We do not do anything. We don't do advocacy or litigation or lobbying, anything that would muddle the water of our scientific credibility. We do science, so we have grad students and postdocs and research staff. And then we do boots on the ground conservation. When I say boots on the ground, it's like getting your hands dirty, buying land, working with conservation easements, a lot of habitat restoration, wetlands restoration. We do reintroduction of species that have gone extinct in areas. So very applied, again, get your hands dirty type conservation. And I will say, I'm not going to talk about it, but our organization works primarily in North America, and we've had projects all across the country. Our 3 primary landscapes that we work in are in the eastern U.S., but we work internationally as well. We've done quite a bit of work in Latin America. We're doing a lot of work in Africa these days. But I'm going to focus in on where we're sitting today. And if you look at our place-based initiatives here in the southeast, you see longleaf savannas. We're not going to talk about that today, but we have quite a bit of work going on and kind of in the coastal plain of the southeast. But what I want to talk about was Appalachian Highlands, which for us, kind of the scope of that would be kind of central Appalachians down on through the region we're in. But the majority of the work that we do in the Appalachian region is in western North Carolina, somewhat in eastern Tennessee, and somewhat in North Georgia, but more so North Carolina. And the way we structure our programs are based on species. And so, a lot of nonprofits over here, I'm not saying this is bad, but have a lot of your big nonprofits, your Conservation Internationals, your Nature Conservancies. A lot of these groups have changed their focus and have become much more focused on people. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I've made a stand many years ago and said, we are going to continue being a species-focused conservation organization. We're not going to try to conserve species by, getting money to get people water or do something. I'm not saying those are bad things, but we are a species-focused organization, and we want people to support us and work with us to care about conserving species. And so our programs, while they are place-based, as I mentioned, showed earlier, we have these kind of flagship species. And I'm going to start talking about arguably one of the coolest species we have in this region, and certainly our flagship. This is a species that we did quite a bit of work on for a while, and then that kind of quieted down as we had a staff change, and now we are ramping this back up. This is going to be our Appalachian flagship species that we do quite a bit of work with. I'm not going to get too deep into their biology, but I will talk to you a little bit about these animals. So first of all, if you look at, this is a distribution map, the gray that you see there, based on a salamander book from the late 90s, which is like a salamander Bible. If any of you are really into salamanders, it should be on your shelf. And there's the Ozark hellbender, which you see over there, kind of Missouri, Arkansas, and then there's the eastern hellbender. And you see the gray there, which is really that historic distribution, and then those yellow polygons represent places where significant populations exist. And I would argue that of the reptiles and amphibians in North America, this is one of the most threatened, endangered species that we have. And you have it right here. You have it in this watershed that you're sitting within. And so, and you can see from this map, again, western North Carolina, places like the Smokies, places like the Tennessee drainage side of North Georgia. These are relative strongholds for this species. And for those of you that don't know much about them, they live in really fast, they like cold water. And so around here, that means typically fast-flowing, well-oxygenated type streams. And I'll go back and just go back here and just look at this animal for a minute. So most of the salamanders that we have in this region belong to a family of salamanders that don't have lungs. They just breathe through their skin. These guys have very reduced lungs, and they do breathe through their skin as well. And you can see that kind of like lasagna look to their side. That's like producing a lot more surface area for them to get as much oxygen as they can out of these cold water streams. So we'll go back. So their habitat is really diverse in kind of an unimpacted stream. This would be, you can find them historically in streams much, much larger than this to streams smaller than this. But they do, again, they're not, they would rarely be on land. They're really kind of an aquatic animal. And they, you would not typically find them in slow, warmer water, things like ponds, lakes, reservoirs. They like fast-moving water. And then we don't understand this completely, but I fully believe that these animals lived in large connected landscapes. So when you had a watershed, you've got different order streams. So let's just say you have the biggest stream kind of filtering out of the watershed. There are certain types of animals in that stream at certain times of the year, and then you have other age class animals at different times of the year, all the way up to the watershed. So in my mind, for hellbenders to be successful, you have these big, connected, cold water systems that their populations can function in, not just one little stretch of creek. They are interesting. They have a diverse diet, but certainly the largest proportion of their diet are crayfish. They'll eat small fish, a whole different series of invertebrates. So diverse diet, but they definitely primarily eat crayfish. And as a lot of you know, invertebrates in general can be great indicators of water quality. Hellbenders themselves can be, because of that, can be great indicators of water quality because they feed on so many of these indicators. And again, this oxygen component is so important for their survival. So as these streams raise in temperature, then, which can happen a variety of ways, it can really impact their populations. They have kind of an interesting reproduction, like many salamanders, certainly not all. It's more like a fish. They have like external fertilization, and it's kind of like a lot of fish where the male actually digs a little nest site under like a rock or a log, and then he entices females to him. He gets the female to lay her eggs, and he puts the sperm on the egg and fertilizes them. A female can lay upwards of, say, 200 eggs, but the males will, if they can, they'll get multiple females to come to their nest. And so you could have a male on a nest that has, eggs in there that he's fertilized, but from multiple females. And then this all happens kind of late summer time frame. That's why if you're in a known hellbender stream, it's not good to be flipping a lot of rocks at that time of year because you can really disrupt the breeding. And so, again, and then the male will stay with those eggs and actually guard them while they're there. There is some cannibalism, in kind of poor water quality situations. You'll even have the male eating some of his own eggs, if need be, some of his own fertilized eggs. So they have this really interesting reproductive biology. As young, so if you look at another picture here, like look at this adult, you'll notice that they don't have external gills. A lot of salamanders have aquatic, these big bushy gills, and those gills are, running blood through them and essentially allowing them to be very efficient in the oxygen that they're getting out of the water. So when hellbenders are young, probably till they're, 5 inches in length or so, they will have these external gills. And when they're real young, they'll spend a lot of time in like real gravelly, kind of small substrate where they're actually physically down in those rocks. So I'm again, getting to that point of a well-connected watershed that has a diversity of cold water habitats, because you've got these real young hellbenders using this real gravelly substrate that they're down in, and you have these big males looking for large rocks to make nests under, and you have everybody out there foraging for crayfish, so it's really a big connected system. And there's so many threats to hellbenders, this is a scene like many you'd see here, even in Macon County, just heavily eroded banks, a lot of sediment being put into these streams, a lot of the overhead canopy cover removed from the stream. All of these types of factors do things that impact hellbenders. They make the water warmer. They create more sediment in the water that fills in these fine spaces in the gravel that the young need. They fill in these big rocks that the adults hide under, that they nest under. And again, this, in my mind, is one of the most threatened reptiles and amphibians in North America. And it was just announced, some of you may have seen, Fish and Wildlife Service is about to list this as a federally, I believe, threatened species. I can't remember, threatened or endangered, but it's about to go on the endangered species list. The other thing I'd mention that you all are probably very familiar with is this recent hurricane that we just had that had such an impact on western North Carolina. I've been working with a state biologist and there's a group of us that are meeting next month, and there have been anecdotal reports of many full-size hellbenders found in debris piles along these larger streams that this hurricane, that flush of water that washed away the homes in these towns in western North Carolina, also washed away the homes of these hellbenders. It might be a giant rock, and the hellbender in a typical high water situation can get out of those flows, but when that rock gets moved, it's probably having a big impact. I'll talk about it a little bit. We don't know what happened to the hellbender populations, and that's going to be one of our next goals, our being the collective group of people working on these. So I want to tell you about the types of things we've done in the past, and then where we're going today. So the first thing, there's a very standard way to survey for hellbenders. It's called eDNA, and what that stands for is environmental DNA. And the concept is, right now, to survey for hellbenders, there's a variety of ways to do it. But many people would be out like snorkeling, looking under rocks, doing a variety of those types of things, which is really fun, but takes a lot of resources. And so we developed this technique that they first developed in Europe. This is over 10 years ago now. The concept, could we go to a creek and take a water sample and then essentially filter that water sample for hellbender DNA? And we've tried this with a whole variety of species, but with hellbenders, it's very, very successful. There's a high level of accuracy. So this is now standard and is being used across the entire range of the hellbender from New York to Alabama. And we developed this in conjunction with the University of Georgia probably, again, over 10 years ago. And, so over the years, again, probably 7, 8 years ago now, we worked with These are the North Carolina data. We worked with the state, and then we also worked on the Tennessee side. And we essentially censused for presence and absence the majority of western North Carolina, just to figure out where hellbenders were and where they weren't. And we did more intensive eDNA sampling here in the Little Tennessee drainage. And again, this just tells us yes, they're there, or no, they're not. It doesn't tell us, oh, there's 1,000 of them here breeding successfully, or there's one hanging on. But we developed that technique, and that's a technique we continue to use to monitor their populations. I mentioned there's a lot of factors that influence, but here in our region, we get a lot of livestock grazing in creeks, and that causes a lot of the sedimentation I was talking about. It impacts the trees along the shoreline. So this again is a historic project, but we're working on new projects now. But we worked with the Raven Gap and Akuchi School, and we ended up working with them to mostly fence all the cattle out of Benny's Creek River and other creeks associated with it, and we put in a well system that brought up water to the cattle in upland areas, so the cows spend less time in the creek. That's an example of the type of project we might do to get cows out of the creek and create better hellbender habitat. In some areas, as I mentioned, you have so much sedimentation that these rocks just are getting filled in. And one thing I didn't mention when I talked about hellbender biology is that for a salamander, they live a long time. And so it's like some of these tortoises, meaning you could have a hellbender or a tortoise that's living for 50, 60, 70 years. The hellbender would be 60 or 70. The tortoise would, though, but a long time, and then, but they're not able to reproduce. And so there are very likely some hellbender populations like this. And so they're simply out of cover. So there have been a number of studies and efforts to install man-made hellbender huts, we call them, or hellbender covers. And I don't know, some of you probably noticed it, but this picture I showed earlier, this is actually in a hellbender hut. Just the lid's taken off. You'll notice that hole in the rock's a perfect square. That's concrete, algae and other things have grown on. So we've done a fair amount of that. We've done a fair amount of that in the Little Tennessee watershed. I'm sure with this recent hurricane and other storms, those have mostly washed away at this point, but we've done quite a bit of that. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to be moving in with a huge group of partners across all of western North Carolina and really across all the southern Appalachians. We're going to be kind of moving into a post-Helene assessment and kind of reconfigure where we think the best hellbender populations are in the state. And then Orianne is going to re-engage with that new strategy in those places to implement habitat-based solutions. Okay. This is a mouthful about hellbenders. But I'll talk a little bit about timber rattlesnakes. I give hour-long presentations on this, so I'm not going to get real in depth, but I'm just going to skim the surface, and then again, I want to have some live snakes out, and I want to give you guys the opportunity to ask me any questions you might have. So, I love venomous snakes. Like our organization works on all kinds of things, but I'm a venomous snake guy. This is my thing. And when I moved here, this photo was actually taken right on the North Carolina border in the southern Antioch wilderness, and this made me feel so good after moving here from Yellowstone. We had wolverines and wolves and grizzly bears and all this, and I was like, wow, I can go up and I can find a rattlesnake sitting on a rock ledge looking over these really wild landscapes. This place still is wild. And so we've done quite a bit of work on rattlesnakes over the years. I'm not going to go into it in depth tonight, but again, I'll just give you a little bit of the surface. If you look here on the right, you'll see that timber rattlesnakes, they are the rattlesnake of the East. That's probably a good, the magenta color there. Like, prehistorically, they had a distribution, something like that. This larger map is probably a little bit more accurate, but there's certainly some mistakes in it. But again, the black points being known snake locations, and kind of a revised distribution. But in general, they're the rattlesnake of the East. They're the snake that we have here. You have plenty of them in Macon County. And one message I like to kind of give people when I talk about timber rattlesnakes is that they're complex. People have this phenomenon where, like, when people see a venomous snake, they lose their minds. Like, they literally do not think straight. They're not thinking properly. And so people don't think, they just think of them as like these varmints that live everywhere. There's thousands of them. They reproduce at this incredible rate. And at least with timber rattlesnakes, that is so far from the truth. The first thing I like to tell people, again, is rattlesnakes, or snakes in general, are animals too, as I mentioned earlier. They don't just like randomly distribute themselves around the landscape waiting to bite a person. They do things. They migrate at certain times of the year. They feed at certain times of the year. They breed. They have all very complex biology. And they actually have a biology that, in my mind, makes them one of the most significant conservation concerns in the region. We don't really have time to go into it, but I just want you to know that their life cycle is very complex. I call it Year of the Rattlesnake. And I give a whole hour-long presentation that is this. Like, you know, I'll walk through this slowly, multiple slides, data. But I just want you to know, they spend a winter somewhere, and they make a true migration, just like a duck or an elk. They go in a relatively high rate of speed from point A to point B to get to those resources. They're not randomly moving. And then, rattlesnakes don't give birth every year. In extreme environments, timber rattlesnakes might only give birth every 4, 5, 6 years. It takes them maybe 10 years to reach sexual maturity. So they're long-lived snakes, but these snakes, many of these females, are only giving birth maybe once, twice, 3 times in their life. And so I told you they're migrating, but they're migrating to different areas. Some of them migrate to areas where they're foraging, and then gravid females that are going to give birth, these are probably more of the ones that you guys see, hiking trails, they end up migrating to very specific places to give birth. They give birth, they make migrations back. There's complex reproduction. Again, I could spend an hour talking about this, but the point is I want to make is that rattlesnakes are animals too. They have a complex biology that's fascinating and should be appreciated. And so I'll just give you a couple of examples of some of the work we've been doing with this flagship species. We've been doing a lot of research and monitoring over the years, so we monitor populations in both Macon County and Raven County. So I probably won't tell most of you, but I know where many of the rattlesnake sites are all around us in the mountains. I'm very secretive because I don't like people going there and killing them all. And this is an example. I was very curious where they spend their winter because I worked up north a lot too, in particular in Vermont, on this species. And the animals, the rattlesnakes all come together to like one hole to spend the winter, the den, right? And so these just show data from a couple snakes, but we caught them up near the top of a ridge. This is actually right on the North Carolina border, it's right near Ring Bald. We caught them at gestation sites. These are females that were at gestation rocks. They're going to give birth. When they gave birth, the mom stays with the babies for like 10 to 14 days, somewhere in there. So we took the mom, we were right there. We didn't like have her abandon the baby snakes. But we took the mom and we quickly attached a radio transmitter to the outside of her and put her back with her babies. And then we tracked them. And the interesting thing, we had more than just these 2 snakes, but both snakes did the same thing. They came off, they went down in elevation, and they overwintered in individual areas. You know, that vision you have like of a rocky face just full of hundreds of rattlesnakes, that's what we see in Vermont. That is not what we're seeing down here. There are a couple places I know of where you have multiple snakes, but usually these snakes are spending the winter either individually or in small groups of 2 or 3. And a lot of these places were kind of nondescript. So the types of places, like here's one, for example. This is just, you can see the rhododendron. This is just a cut bank of a dry creek bed. And one of our rattlesnakes just went into the holes underneath there. She spent the winter by herself. And then we had another snake that kind of went into it was kind of a rocky pile, but it wasn't like a big rock cliff face. It was just a little rocky area kind of out in the middle of the forest. Point being, we've been doing a lot of research on these animals in the southern Appalachians and just trying to learn new and interesting things like this, that, they're not primarily communal denners. They mostly den by themselves or in small numbers. And really what we're doing a lot of that, like boots on the ground part of conservation I was talking about, is rattlesnake stewardship. And I got this idea because if you go up north where we work in Vermont, because hundreds and hundreds of snakes go on the ground in one place, all of these, and you can count the number. So like if in Vermont we had 2 of those left, and New Hampshire they have 1, in Maine there's 0, Rhode Island there's 0, Massachusetts I think there's 6, Connecticut maybe 5. So you can count the number of these places. And they all have somebody who's like the champion of that place. It might be a carpenter. One guy's like a taxi driver in New York City, just loves these snakes. And every free moment, he's out there watching these snakes, kind of counting them. They might be working with an academic to figure out how to do this in some standardized way. Keeping people out of there, keeping people from hurting the snakes. And so I've always called them, in my mind, rattlesnake stewards. Like they're stewarding these snakes and trying to give them every chance to succeed. And so, I really thought, like in this region, which being southern Appalachians, where it's so different, like what does it mean to be a rattlesnake steward? Because that's what rattlesnakes need. There's plenty of land here. As I talked about earlier, the forest has changed, but rattlesnakes can persist here. But what really impacts them is being killed. And I won't get into it, but rattlesnakes do not do well. People think of them as varmints, but they do not do well being killed. And you could say, no, what does well being killed? But like, I would argue that mice do very well being killed. You can go to your cabin, you can kill every mouse. I guarantee you, when you come back 2 months later, you're going to have to kill another pile of mice. I won't get into it, but rattlesnakes aren't like that. When you start killing rattlesnakes, they disappear. Their populations plummet. So, the main thing we're trying to do here, the main way that we're trying to steward rattlesnakes and ensure that they're here for long term, really has to do more with the people, I decided. I mean, I guess they're dealing with people up there, scaring them away. But we do a variety of things. First of all, we do a lot of education outreach programs around rattlesnakes where, again, I will talk for an hour on that year of the snake, and I have 50 slides and all kinds of interesting pictures and data, and I weave together this very interesting picture of just what a rattlesnake does all year. And knowledge is power. When people understand, again, that these are truly animals in biology, they think a little bit differently. I've had people come up to me and be like, well, I saw your talk and I saw a rattlesnake and I didn't kill it. And so knowledge is important, especially when it comes to venomous snakes. So we do a lot of that, all age groups. We're reaching thousands and thousands of people in this region every year with in-depth presentations on rattlesnakes. We also there's a lot of, I call it low-density residential development. This whole region is characterized by that, right? Like, we take these mountain landscapes and we put low-density housing all through. And so essentially what we're doing is putting low-density roads and houses, and we're putting ourselves where the rattlesnakes live, so we're going to interact with them. And then on top of that, you take a house like this, and people create, like, rattlesnake magnet habitat in their backyard. And, you can see all this rock and these open rocks here. I don't know exactly what the aspect is on this picture, but, people are creating incredible habitat. So we go to people's houses, and as part of this rattlesnake stewardship, we walk around their house with them. We tell them all, talk about their landscaping, talk about where piles of what are. We look at the landscape all around their house for where rattlesnakes are most likely to be naturally, and we help them make decisions about how to change their landscape to lower the probabilities of having a snake at their house on their back porch when they step out at night, barefoot in the summer. So we do a lot of kind of like landscape planning with these houses, people who build houses in remote areas. And then this is actually me a long time ago, and we move rattlesnakes for people as well. We typically don't come out for every copperhead. Copperheads are very common, and copperheads, I don't want to say they do as well as mice being killed, but they don't do anywhere near as poorly as rattlesnakes. So when I say they do well or they do poor, what I'm saying is that if you kill an individual rattlesnake, you're having a big impact on the rattlesnake population. If you kill an individual mouse, in most cases, you're not having a significant impact on the mouse population. That's what I mean when I say that. So we do come out to people's houses. We remove rattlesnakes. And oftentimes people have created like gestation sites where pregnant females come to their house and they're going to be there all summer. We'll move the rattlesnake, we'll move her into captivity for the summer. She will come right back. We have her give birth in captivity, and then we release all of the baby and the mom back into the woods behind the person's house. And we help them fix their landscaping so that rattlesnake's not going to use that particular rock again. So we do a lot of that. When I think about stewardship, those are the types of programs we do for rattlesnakes. So with the PowerPoint, I'm going to stop there. There's a lot I could talk about, but I wanted to keep that kind of brief. Maybe it wasn't brief, but I wanted to keep it brief because I did want to I like to have conversations about rattlesnakes, and I'm sure people have questions, like anything you ever want to ask about a rattlesnake. That's really what I want to hear. So I put our website up here. Feel free to check us out. Sign up for our newsletter. We don't inundate you. Become a member. All of that. We do have some info here that I'll talk about at the end. We have a venomous snake brochure that's really built for the Chattahoochee National Forest, but it's applicable to the Nantahala, and we have to sign up for our newsletter. So before I move on to the live snakes and just like a rattlesnake conversation, like anybody have any questions about the Orianne Society, the type of work that we do, anything of that nature?
Can people go to your headquarters?
You can. It's not set up like an open, just walk in. I mean, if you came by and it's an office, but all of our live animals are at the office. Not all of them, a lot of them. So you could come by and if somebody was there, or if you contacted us, like, hey, I want to come down, I want to bring my kid, or, we can set that up. We have a bunch of live animals and tortoises and snakes and, the snakes you're about to see live in our office. They're education animals. We have some of the animals in South Georgia facilities. We have a Florida facility. We're still kind of affiliated with it. So we have conglomerations of animals in multiple places. Our headquarters is in Tiger, Georgia, so in Raven County. Okay, great. We can get some lights. Okay, so we here in the southern Appalachian region in Macon County and in Raven County, as an example, we have 2 species of venomous snakes. I don't care what anybody tells you, like diamondbacks, do not exist here. People talk about cottonmouths or water moccasins. If you saw a cottonmouth or a water moccasin, somebody put it here. So in Raven County where I live, that is the county in the state of Georgia that is the furthest from a cottonmouth in the wild of any county in the state. Like, you can't get further from a cottonmouth in the state of Georgia than you can in Raven County. So Macon County would just be kind of an extension of that. Go ahead.
They're more of a coastal species, aren't they? Like, they'd be more towards like the coast of
cottonmouths? Yeah, primarily they're a coastal plain species. They come up into the Piedmont in places.
And in particular, like on the west side of Georgia, so Georgia's like, Piedmont, coastal plain. They get the Blue Ridge ecoregion here, which we're in the Blue Ridge. And then they have like ridge and valley and a little bit of the Cumberland. So cottonmouths come up that west side of Georgia in those low valleys, like getting up towards like Dalton or up towards like Chattanooga. You could find them, but they're not very common. But you could go to other places like the Mississippi River drainage, and you could go up to like the junction of, say, like, where like Paducah, Kentucky is, the Shawnee National Forest, and that all comes together, Illinois and Kentucky and all of that. Cottonmouths go up there, and there's places with incredible numbers of cottonmouths on the Shawnee.
Snake Road or whatever.
So there's a place called Snake Road, yeah. And I've done a whole episode on Snake Road on my podcast. So I have a podcast called Snake Talk. We cover all kinds of topics from anything you can imagine, with hundreds of episodes now. So snake bite, if you're interested in snakes, like you're interested in copperheads, which are related to cottonmouths, we have a whole episode that's just like I interview like the world's leading authority on copperheads, and we talk for an hour and a half, just everything about copperheads. What do copperheads eat? And him and I just are going back and forth, and then we're talking about whatever it might be. We have episodes of like the leading snakebite doctors in the world, talking about treatment in humans. Top vets in the world talking about treatment with dogs, aversion training with dogs. Talk to snakes in the Bible. Talk to a theologian whose whole research program is focused on snakes in the Bible. And we talk about all these different, so it's just incredibly diverse, but everything's snakes. It's called Snake Talk. Anyways, let me take out one of these two species. I will say, in Rabun County, we're getting pretty close to a third species in that, so you've got Rabun County just south here, right? And then just southwest of Rabun County is Stevens County. And that's where Toccoa is. You still have the Chattahoochee National Forest there. It's Lake Russell WMA, if you're familiar. So in Stevens County, pygmy rattlesnakes make their way all the way up, and you can find them in Stevens County. So they're right on the edge. And we've always thought maybe you'd be able to find one around Tallulah Gorge, but nobody ever has. So we have two venomous snakes. So the first one is a copperhead, and this is in many places where it occurs. This is one of the most common snakes. Like I would say in Rabun County, this might be the most common snake. I would expect it to be a similar case here in Macon. This is a really large one. This is a mountain. I caught this at my house, and I live on Betty's Creek, right on the edge of it. And so they're incredibly camouflaged. You see that pattern with like those saddles. Imagine the forest floor we have around here with all those dried oak leaves. You can't have a better camouflage. These animals with real diverse diet. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, would you say that these snakes are very lethargic right now, just because they're usually like, it's winter time or something?
Well, but we don't, some people who keep snakes will like winter their snakes, meaning they'll like lower the temperature. And we don't do that, so we keep them at temperature.
So they don't realize it.
No, I will say there are some natural, like a lot of our animals had come from the wild at one point. I mean, some are captive bred, but they know, and a lot of them will eat less during the winter. They'll just refuse food more. So copperheads account for the most human bites in North America every year. However, the toxicity of the venom of this species is really, really low. There's only ever been like 5 or 6 confirmed deaths, and those were, had really like confounding factors, like health factors. So, drop for drop, this is not a very venomous species. They're, in many, if you get a bite, go to the hospital. But in many, many cases, you probably won't even need an antivenom. But I have heard, you definitely won't go to the hospital. It could make you very sick. They are a viper, like the timber rattlesnake, the other venomous one we have here. They have their eyes, and on the tip of their nose they have a nostril. But then in between that they have a pit. And that's where the term is a hole. This guy would sit still, some of you can probably see it. But they have a hole between their eye and the nostril. And that's the pit. It's where the term pit viper comes from. So vipers are a family of animals. Just like dogs or Canidae, cats or Felidae, those are different families of animals. And so a viper is viperidae, it's a family. And so if you compared this to like a king snake or a rat snake, you see rat snakes commonly. Those are different families. So like this snake is as different from the black rat snake you see as a dog is from a cat. I'm generalizing, but. And so these are vipers, and vipers are split into two groups. The pit vipers, and then they call them the true vipers. And most true vipers live in the old world, like Asia, Africa. And here in North America, most of what we have are pit vipers. And the pits are like, they're concave. They don't like go all the way into the snake's head. It's like a concave area. And then on the inside of that, the snake has all these infrared receptors. And it uses those to sense heat. So essentially, let me back up and say that the nerve from that pit connects with the nerve from the eye and goes back into the brain. And so we think that vipers see in some combination of like a color spectrum like we see and the infrared color spectrum or heat. So you could imagine like, the movie Predator, like with Arnold Schwarzenegger, how that alien would see like colors. And it would see the shapes of things, but it would see colors for heat. We think that vipers see the same way. That like if this was out hunting at night and a mouse ran across a log, that the background would kind of be blues and purples, if you will. And that mouse, like the core of it, would probably be like bright red, and the outsides might be oranges and yellows. So they use that pit as like a sensing device. The other thing the snake's doing is it's sticking its tongue out a lot, right? And so that what the snake's doing is it's picking up chemicals in the environment. It could be in the air, it could be on this projector, it could be on a whole variety of things, but it's picking up chemicals and then it's running it through. It's running them through an organ in the back of the mouth called the Jacobson's organ. And it essentially is like an incredibly detailed sense of smell. And that's probably how these snakes are mostly interpreting their world. They're moving through the woods and they can smell a chipmunk that had been on a log. And they can tell if that chipmunk was there an hour ago or 3 hours ago. Did it go by 4 times or did it go by once? And so like they're moving through this forest and it's an entire forest of road signs. And that's how they decide where to set up. That's how they decide trails to follow to go find a female that they smell during the breeding season. So that tongue flicking is really important. It's probably one of the strongest senses for snakes when they're just navigating the world. Go ahead.
Do we have a male or female?
This one, I'm trying to remember. I think this is a female. I don't know if we've ever sexed it, but I believe it's a female. But I would say, I don't know, it's pretty big. Maybe it's a male. But the way we would find out, I don't know tubes, we could find out right now. But so snakes actually have a tail. And so, so basically, right where my index finger is back, that is actually the snake's tail, okay? So a snake is not just one big tail. It has a tail. And that, in the snake's tail, in males, are the sex organs. And they're like, kind of like, I think of them like inverted balloons, and they go down into the tail. And then they have internal fertilization. So the male will like invert this balloon and he'll insert it into the female to deliver the sperm. And so males, this is snakes in general, their tail would be longer than a female of the same size, and there'll be like a little kind of bulgy there, but their tails are longer. And then the other thing you can do, so you can just look at them. With rattlesnakes, I can usually just look at them like this and be like male, female. But you can either, if I had it in hand, which I don't have tubes with me, so I'm not going to pick it up, but you can invert the hemipenes, which are those balloons I was talking about. Like you can squeeze the tail a little twist, and sometimes they'll pop them out. Or you can probe them. So they make snake probes where you run this little metal thing down into their tail, and if it goes in, it's a male. Because again, you're going into his inverted hemipene. If it's a female, it's just muscle, just stops. So.
Under what situations would the snake strike for defense or aggression as compared to?
So first thing, this snake, I don't do this with venomous snakes, but this snake is so mellow. I won't pick it up, but like I'll touch its tail, and I would never do that with this other snake I'm about to take out. This snake is so, I could pick it up and just hold it like you would with a snake. I won't do it, it's too dangerous. So the first thing is that snakes are individuals. They're all different. You can have a snake that's just like people. This person's angry all the time, this person's sad all the time. Snakes are the same way. We could have a copperhead here that just is like, just constantly wanting to bite everybody. This individual snake is just really mellow. In terms of settings, like say behind your house or whatever, like if you were to like step on or put your hand on a venomous snake, a copperhead or a rattlesnake, they're almost guaranteed to bite you. Not 100% of the time, but they will likely bite you. The other thing, even a snake with a personality to bite, if you will, they only bite about a third to half the length of their body. And that's if they're like perfectly coiled up, and maybe they got like a tree behind them. And so, with this snake, which is a big copperhead, you're talking striking this far. Which means, again, you got to pretty much touch it. But if you like step on the snake, it will likely try to bite you. If they're just coiled up and you're walking by them, they likely won't even move.
How often would you say that is drive-by versus a actual injection bite?
So in North America, based on statistics, every year they calculate. So first of all, what is a drive-by? Let's explain that for those who don't know. So a drive-by is, so rattlesnakes, vipers in general, can control whether and how much venom they inject into you. And so a dry bite means they bit you, but they either didn't have any venom or they decided not to inject venom. And so you get the physical, you get puncture wounds, but you don't get any venom inside you that's going to cause, the damage. And so about 25 to 50% of bites in North America are dry. And I don't know how much that varies species to species. Again, this accounts for the most bites in North America, and this species accounts for the most deaths in North America. Doesn't mean it's the most deadly. Part of what that is that these are the two eastern venomous snakes, or the primary venomous snakes in the east. Most people live in the east, so we have more of an overlap with these animals. This is a very common animal, accounts for a lot of bites, not very toxic. This is a less common animal. Generally around people, their populations decline very quickly, but there's still a fair number of them, but they have much more toxic venom, and again, because of that overlap with people and that interaction, they account for the most deaths every year in the US. So let me take that out real quick. Any questions about copperheads before I kick out the rattlesnake?
Can we get a picture of her?
Sure. That's pretty good right there. You can come around this side so you can get his face.
What would be the reaction if you got bit by one?
Of the snake?
Yeah.
Of you or of I can tell you how you react.
Yeah, physical reaction. of the symptom of getting bit, like to know what the
Yeah, so venoms are very complex. Put the snake back, take out the other snake, and then we'll talk about venom.
Do they try to fight each other?
They can, but both of these snakes are pretty mellow. So this is a timber rattlesnake. This is a yellow morph that come in two color morphs. So venom-wise, there are all kinds of different types of venom, but most of the species we have around here are really attacking your red blood cells primarily, but again, they're complex. And so really, with these species, they're using their venom for feeding, and it kills the prey. They then, that scent, the tongue flicking, so the prey runs off and dies in the woods. And then they tongue flick, and they actually, because there's, say, mice trails everywhere in the woods. And so then they tongue flick and follow their own venom trail. That's how they track down, find the dead mouse, say. And then they swallow it. And then the venom is acting internally in that mouse, and it's breaking down the tissues. It's almost functioning like digestive enzymes from the inside out, while their stomach is digesting from the outside in. So these species are going to have a lot of like tissue breakdown, like if you get a venom load, like swelling, internal bleeding, because again, your cells are being digested, essentially. Some timber rattlesnakes in some parts of their range, so snake venom can vary across the species range too. Some places with timber rattlesnakes, there's much more of like a neurotoxic component, which affects like your neurological system. Like your brain can't tell your lungs to take in oxygen or air, and it's not able to tell your heart to beat right or your hand to move. And there's a lot of the most deadly species in the world are highly neurotoxic. Like a lot of what you think about, like in Australia and Africa, coral snakes here in the southeast are like that. But a lot of the most deadly ones are like that. These animals are more going to kind of be digesting you primarily, but they're complex. So rattlesnakes, any rattlesnake questions? Anything you ever want to ask, no questions.
Well,
Go ahead.
I grew up along the Vermont upstate New York border, and I remember my dad telling me that when he was young, there was a bounty on rattlesnakes on Lake Champlain.
Yep.
And so people would bring him in, and he had got one, and he put it on mounted it on a board. Yeah. So.
Yeah, there's a book you'd probably be interested in. So Vermont had a bounty on rattlesnakes. It was the last state to remove the bounty. Yeah, I can't remember what it was at the end. It might have even been like up to like $20 a snake or something like that. And I think it was around 1980 is when that bounty was removed. It would have been in the 70s, but I think it might have been 80. And so, yeah, there's quite a history there. There's a great book on the history of rattlesnakes, kind of in that lower Champlain Valley, and the history of the people, and what happens. A lot of these people that own some of these rattlesnake sites, they actually started doing it sustainably, because they like the money. So it was like they're hunting white-tailed deer and trying to do that sustainably. They didn't want to kill all the rattlesnakes. They just want to catch X number per year. No, they didn't want to touch the pregnant females because that's producing next year's money. So, but there's a great book on it. Hold on, off the top of my head. I have it in my office. I'd come down to the tiger.
Have you ever been bitten?
By a venomous snake? No. I stepped on one once out in the southern Antahela wilderness, 3 miles from the road. We were monitoring snake populations, and I had gators on, like snake-proof gators, and the snake, I stepped on it, felt it, and I just kind of launched in the air, and it turned and whacked me in the shin as I was launching it. I have a great picture where you can see the venom, like paired venom on my shin on those gators, like dripping down. But no, I've had a couple close calls, more in the lab, like when you're handling them. and I'm not handling them with my hands now, but like I do a lot of that, like putting them in tubes and we're studying them and measuring them and doing all these things. That's where I've had my closest calls, but I've never had a snake.
Do you have any knowledge of if you move snakes, it can disrupt their equilibrium and?
Well, I mean, it doesn't disrupt, well, I don't know about their equilibrium. What it does is like, so you're talking about like translocating snakes. So I talked about how one of the things we do to steward snake populations around here is if you call us up, we'll come out and we'll move a rattlesnake off your property for you. But if you move a rattlesnake too far, or any of many snakes, there's been a lot of research on this all over the country, the snakes start moving really erratically. Long distances, they start losing weight, and a lot of them end up dying. And so it ends up, I mean, if you're like, take this thing and move it 3 miles, I'll be like, I'm not even, you might as well kill it, because I'd be killing it. I'm not going to waste the gas to go get it. So when I come move snakes, I tell people, I'm like, well, I'll come move that snake, but I'm going to just move it 300 yards into the woods for you. It probably won't come back tomorrow. And if it's going to come back, I will likely know it. I'll be able to tell you, oh, the snake's about to shed. It's using that rock on your stoop to shed its skin, or it's a gravid female, will do something else. But yes, so, I mean, imagine if you got moved to somewhere, like you just all of a sudden woke up and you were in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico, in the desert, you'd be running around frantic, trying to figure out where you are, and what to do, and how do I eat, how do I get water, versus if like someone put a hood over your face and all of a sudden you woke up and you were like, over at Sakura or something.
Oh, yeah.
So anyways, that's what we do when we translocate them, and there's a lot of studies that show, if your goal is not to kill the snake, which is our goal is to find ways for people and snakes to live together. And so we move them, but we don't move them long distances. And I tell the people that. I'm not like secretly like, it gets dark and dump it out.
What's up with these snakes that you have done in captivity?
These individuals? So this one I caught at my house, the copperhead. I catch multiple copperheads at my house every year. I catch an occasional timber rattlesnake. And this one was just so large and had such a prominent copper head that I decided to take it and put it in captivity to use for education. And my previous copperhead had died of old age a couple years prior. This rattlesnake was one of these translocated snakes where we caught its mom gestating in somebody's rock features on their back patio, and it was going to be there all year, so we took the mom into the office, and then at the end of the summer she gave birth in the office, and we kept this snake and let the mom and all the other ones go. And I do that. I kept another one from last year, similar thing, just had a crazy pattern on his back, so I kept that. I have too many rattlesnakes.
I meant to ask this question earlier. So you keep on saying birthing. Are they live birthing?
Sorry? Birds?
The snakes, are they live birthing? They don't.
So there are different modes in snakes, and the three primary ones are called viviparous, oviparous, and ovoviviparous. And so oviparous would be like you think of a bird, like a snake that lays an egg, like a shelled egg. And a lot of like your black rat snakes do that. They'll pick a rock, they'll pick a log, they'll lay a shelled egg underneath it. The mom leaves and they hatch at some point. Then you have well, let me give the other extreme. You have viviparous, which are snakes that it's different. They don't have a placenta and all that, but they're kind of like mammals in that the mom internally has a connection to the baby snakes inside her, meaning she can like give them energy and she can take away waste and bad things. So she has a connection to them.
What kind of snake would that be?
They're pretty rare, but like an anacondas like that, for example. And then you have ovoviviparous, and so a viviparous snake would give birth to a live snake. A baby snake would come out. And then you have ovoviviparous, and these are ovoviviparous, which is the, so what it means is that they have eggs, just like the rat snake, not just like, they're different, but they have eggs. It's just the female keeps the eggs inside of her body. And so what I mean, you're like, yeah, everything that reproduces has an egg, right? But what I mean is that the female produces the egg, has them inside her body, and has no connection to them. Like if she didn't put enough yolk in them, even though they're inside her body, she cannot adjust that. She cannot be like, well, I'll eat an extra mouse this month, and I'll send that, put that in the yolk. It's like she creates them in her body. And the strength of that, or the advantage of that, is it allows them to control the temperature of the eggs better. They can sit in the sun and warm them up and develop them faster, or they can, and this is the adaptation that has allowed snakes to get into extreme cold environments around the world. Like your northern snakes, snakes that get into the Arctic, snakes that get up into the Himalaya and other places. They're all these ovoviviparous snakes. They're these snakes where like it's such a frigid cold environment, but the mom can control that temperature of the babies and maximize how quickly and how fast they grow. So it's an adaptation for doing that. So when these snakes are born, they come out like a clear sac, like a jelly liquid sac. And then within a matter of minutes, the babies come out of that sac. But that's an egg. And again, the mother can't do anything with that when it's in her body. But she has a lot more control over the temperature and all of that. So, ovoviviparous.
So I moved here sight unseen. My dad moved here first, and then my family moved here. And we were staying at his house right when we got here. And I love my dad, but there's a lot of things he did that I do not do, okay? So he lived on the Palisades River, and he had a lot of river rats running around on his property.
People or
And
rats?
some were in his house, okay? He was living as a bachelor, and then I came in with my family. And so in his laundry room, he had a heart trap for the rats.
Mm-hmm.
And he would let them go down the road, somebody else's house, I would say. And so one day I went in there to do the laundry, and there was no rat in the trap, but there was a very long snake skin wrapped around the trap.
Yeah.
So it shed it. It must have come in like in the middle of the night and shed it. So I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you can tell the species based on the skin, like the scales will have different characteristics, like some are ridged or keeled. Rattlesnakes, sometimes you can see that pattern. It's probably a rat snake, but who knows? So, any other questions? You had a question way back when still?
It was kind of about the dens, actually. Are they social? I mean, they keep going back to the same den, or they cohabitate?
Down here, I don't know, but like up north, yeah, there's a lot of, like, they call it philopatry, or like, they're going back to the same overwintering site year after year after year. Down here, I don't know, and I would suspect it's not as much, given, like, I gave that example of what we saw, like, just a dry creek bed that it went in. Like, I would guess that maybe it's more of the same general area, but not the same hole, for example.
And what about, like, other species in the den, like tortoises or anything like that?
Well, so up here, down in, like, the coastal plain, and there are timber rattlesnakes in the coastal plain, where we have tortoises, the tortoises, actually, that hole that the tortoise builds is critical for a lot of snakes and a lot of animals in general. And so snakes will overwinter in that. There's a lot of species that do that. But, yeah, I mean, in terms of, like, them overwintering with a rat snake, and, I mean, I think they're so individual. There are some places where, like, multiple snakes are going into one crack, but it's way less common than it is further north.
Do snakes come out on warm days, warm periods in the winter here, or do they overwinter sort of solidly for a period?
They can. Snakes have been seen in most states, even up in New England, I think every month of the year. So they can, but if they do, it would be, you probably have a multi-day stretch of warm, and then, they'd probably just be out right outside of wherever they're spending the winter and go back in. They're not out wandering around doing things. They're just like a lot of the animals that your husband studies, they're ectotherms, or what people call cold-blooded. And so their body temperature is not like ours. Our body temperatures are all about the same right now. Their body temperature changes with the environment. So when it's cold, we shiver, and we have other physical things we do to try to keep our body temperature where it's supposed to be. And we eat all the time, and we do all these things. Snakes aren't like that, and their body temperature changes with the environment. Like if I was to just put this snake outside right now in this weather, it wouldn't struggle to keep its temperature up. Its body temperature would just plummet and it would die. And so it's a whole different, but many animals in the world, fishes, reptiles, amphibians, and on, a lot of animals are that. Their physiology is completely different. And so for them to come out, it's just different than a mammal. They might come out, it would be short, they wouldn't really do anything. The main thing they'd be coming out for is to get some sun. And what that probably means is that they've got something, they're trying to raise their body temperature to maybe deal with an infection or something like that. Like, for example, there's something called snake fungal disease that's hitting snake populations. And timber rattlesnakes are one of the ones that are getting it. Places like New Hampshire and eastern Massachusetts where that's really being seen, they've noticed that in the middle of the winter, they would have all these snakes coming out and just trying to bask in the sun, even though the temperatures are like 20 degrees. Or I don't know if it's 20, but the temperatures are cold. Like they're not able to raise their body temperature, but they're just trying to raise their body temperature to deal with these infections. So that was a long answer. I probably didn't even answer your question, but go ahead.
I'm so excited that you're here. So,
yeah, we were talking as well about doing something. But anyways, go ahead.
So he's helped clients of mine when they have a snake, and he's helped me convince people what to do about snake habitat and all these wonderful things. But you answered every single one of the questions that I had, except for especially about individuals. Are they, in your experience, in your in-depth relationships, all of these various animals and species? Thank you so much for having the relationship with these animals and the empathy with these animals to even ken that they're individuals and that they have individual personalities. That says everything about you.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Most people don't think of snakes like that. Again, they don't think of them as animals. They're just like, there are snakes out in the wild. They're there to hurt me. But, they can hurt you. But they don't, the snake's venom isn't even, it's not designed, it's designed for feeding. And again, they are individuals, and thank you for saying that.
Well, I just, the only question I have, given everything that you presented me, how, in this outpost that is the Cowie School, and those of us that work and live in this landscape, what are the best ways for us to, you've given everyone a lot of inspiration, I know, but what are some of the best ways we can connect people to you that encounter timber rattlers in the landscape, and how would you have us best approach that?
Yeah, I would say like those stewardship activities that I talked about, a lot of that has been focused in Raven County, and then like part of it in Macon, but mostly up on the Highlands Plateau. And we've actually done relatively little down in the rest of Macon County, and I would like to have better connections there where we are coming and helping people with rattlesnake issues. I think we went to one this year that you connected. That was a copperhead. We couldn't find the snake, but basically getting the word out that we do help, and we've talked about this year. The goal is for us to be a little more proactive, getting the word out that if you have a rattlesnake, we want to help. Yeah, we thought about developing a network of people. This is what we did in Vermont. We had a network of people, so it wasn't always our people that had to go out. We have 4 or 5 people, and who were like volunteers, who we would train, and they handle snakes a little bit, and we give them the equipment. And then what we did in the communities, and maybe we should think about something like this up here as we could talk about, we created a refrigerator magnet, and you put it on your fridge, and it said, basically it says, if there's a rattlesnake, call these numbers, and it gave a list of people's numbers, and you just call the first number. Hey, I've got a snake in my backyard. And that might be good. The problem is in North Carolina, permitting is a lot different than in Georgia. Georgia, we don't need permits to do that. Anyways. But yes, we would like to get more to Macon County. So, and there's some brochures that I mentioned earlier that Tracy designed, has our contact info, and talks about venomous snakes. It is focused on the Chattahoochee National Forest, which might not appeal as much to some people, but it's completely applicable to the same things here. So, any more snake questions? Yeah, go ahead. That's theirs.
I don't know, I lived in Georgia for a little while, and they talk about a venomous snake they call the Highland moccasin. Is that a copperhead, or what do they?
I'm assuming it was a copperhead.
That's all I think.
I mean, unless it was like maybe over in northwest Georgia, like in that Ridge Valley region, like natural cotton. It was probably
Copperhead.
yeah, it could have been a rattlesnake, just the name people. It could have been, because these snakes look different. Some of these are, this one's a yellow morph, but they get much yellower than this. Some of them are like bright yellow. And then some of them are jet black. And some are kind of more grayish. And so, like just in that one species, you have a bunch of different looking animals color-wise. So, who knows? It could have been like the black ones they call a Highland. But there are two species here.
I think there should be a refrigerator magnet for the hellbenders too.
Yeah.
To help stays down.
Yeah.
We had somebody else come give a talk on hellbenders, and she mentioned that sometimes fishermen will be stabbing them
Yeah.
because they're trying to keep their fish off the line.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that was Lori. That's who we work with. Great. Well, I appreciate everybody coming out. Such a cold evening. Thank you.
If it was a warm night, they'd just been all over.